So James Cameron's Terminator 2 Judgment Day is a very complex legacy in home video, with many different transfers, audio mixes, and special features. And while I did cover this in another video many years ago, there's a lot more information out there to share. So let's delve once again into the home video history of one of the greatest sequels ever made. So grossing over $500 million at the worldwide box office, Terminator 2 Judgment Day became the highest grossing film of 1981, so much exemplifying Jim Cameron's acumen of this big blockbuster action filmmaking with groundbreaking visual effects. It always came to that core of emotional humanity within the storytelling. It's such an amazing film that just like, it was so crowd-praising, so satisfying, loads so much praise upon it, even at the Oscars, ran the gamut of getting a lot of technical awards for Best Visual Effects, Best Makeup, Best Sound Editing, and additional nominations for Best Cinematography and Best Film Editing. And interesting enough with the sound, because the film actually had 3 different theatrical sound mixes. It had Dolby Stereo, a 70mm 6-track magnetic track, and the very interesting Cinema Digital Sound 5.1 mix that we'll get into much more detail about much later on in the video when it comes up to where it fits into the home video history of the film. Now, with as profitable as T2 was theatrically, it was undoubtedly profitable on home video as it debuted on every major and some niche home video formats over the years, sometimes with multiple releases. From analog video disc and tape formats, to standard definition digital video, to high definition, 3D, and ultra high definition Blu-ray, the film has no shortage of releases to highlight. Now, for the first slew of releases we're talking about here, you'll have the Dolby Surround track, which you could matrix out in your Dolby Pro Logic on your receiver for sort of a Fox surround sound experience. Now, the first major release here is the Laserdisc one from November of 1991 in the silver T2 box set, which presented the film in widescreen and an 8-page booklet with an essay by James Cameron. Well, there are things involved in the whole thing, no trailers, no other stuff. That's much later on. But also had much more of a standalone release with a widescreen edition, but also the 4x3 edition. Now, the big thing about James Cameron is that after he kind of did some stuff in 185 like the Terminator and Aliens, he switched over to Super 35mm. Now this meant as opposed to the anamorphically shot CinemaScope features, you can much more easily compose it down and not have to do a bunch of panning and scanning, which would normally kind of wreck the compositions of the films. You can much more open up the top and bottoms and kind of chop off a little bit of the sides and whatnot, so you could get more vertical stuff, but not quite as wide in some places. So for every additional shot and scene and whatnot, they would go in and kind of recompositing our film for the other format. Now the interesting thing, because I had the 4x3 version when I did the original video, and I noticed the fact that the color grading was different from that version up to the later THX Special Edition version. I thought that would be kind of like reflected in the pre-THX theatrical cut Laserdisc. Oddly enough, that is not the case. They seem like completely different masters. Like in terms of like the color grading, they're very different in a lot of cases. Some points they kind of more closely align, but a lot of places they look drastically different. Like the reds on this entire master here are much more saturated than they are in the widescreen edition, and also the blues are much more blue. As the entire widescreen edition kind of leans a little bit more towards the green, a little bit slightly towards the teal in some places, this one reflects the blues in a much more pure sense in that regard. So it's very interesting seeing the 2 different masters next to each other, which were prepared at the same time and released at the same time, but kind of approached in slightly different ways. A little bit of variation, but still definitely different. Now, as was pretty common at the time, the VHS version would typically just have the 4x3 edition of the film. But in 1982, there was a widescreen box set with both the Terminator and Terminator 2 released, with a 3rd tape featuring a 55-minute documentary on the making of both films, plus a 20-page booklet with another essay by James Cameron. This thing had a nice hologram cover, really nice little box. It's a nice everything to have that on widescreen for both films at the time. Now, my first edition of the films on home media was just a 2-day set with a slipcover on it, which both films were in widescreen, which came out a little bit later on from this, I believe. But it's a really good type of thing to get those out on VHS and widescreen. As the 90s went along, widescreen became more prevalent on VHS, but definitely Laserdisc was the place to be. But the more interesting type of thing I was surprised this was happening this early on, but it was Japan. They were way ahead of the curve on this type of stuff. Was the Muse High Vision HD format, which was Laserdisc, but a 1035i HD signal. Now, this entire thing was very, very seldomly seen. It was the type of thing that went off just in Japan, didn't really take off much because it was a little too high-end, a little too expensive. But a lot of people have seen this stuff, are very, very impressed by it. Just like it's a further upgrade beyond where Laserdisc was a standard definition format. This one gives it much more resolution, much more quality, much more detail, stuff like that, but still an analog signal to the most part. It was used with component output video cables into widescreen CRTs. Now this is a certain thing that if you've ever seen the movie Heat or Strange Days, I've constantly noticed there's a couple of TVs in there that are CRT widescreen TVs. This seems like a great anomaly at the time, like widescreen TVs in the mid-90s. It's like 10 years off from that. But this kind of explains it a little bit, the fact there was a format out there trying to push forward high definition before really the consumer base could really kind of grasp onto it and really kind of have it flourish to a certain degree, considering the technology was there, and Terminator 2 had a release on this format, which apparently was 16:9 format. So pretty much the type of thing that was very ahead of the game, pretty much pushing forward on certain things, but still just a theatrical cut in that Dolby Digital Surround format. Now that was in May of 1993, but by the end of 93 in November, James Cameron was releasing the special edition of T2. Now this is after we already did special edition releases of Aliens and the Abyss. Now it's T2's turn. So in November of 1993, we got the fantastic box set, which is like one of the most coveted releases of the format because the transfer looks fantastic. The great quality of it all, everything like that, even though I will mention the fact that even though it is THX, and it seems like it's a big upgrade past the theatrical cut Laserdisc in widescreen, the transfers almost look identical. Not a lot of different things in terms of color grading or detail, they look a lot alike. Some variations here and there, like I kind of said with the 4x3 edition, but even much more minimal in this regard. But the fact of the matter is, this included additional 12 minutes of scenes. They extended the film out and included a slew of bonus materials. Like this was the treasure trove. As a lot of films were kind of getting up on things like Cameron's films on Laserdisc just packed it full. So much with documentaries, audio commentaries, so much in that regard. This one definitely hit it off on the great ends because like people saw this much stuff packed into it with this wonderful little embossed sort of metal plate on the entire leather bound cover or whatnot. It just looked fantastic, and people are so satiated for this entire thing. It's way step up from the original silver box set they got from 91. This is much bigger type of stuff. 2 years on, they had Guns N' Roses music video for You Could Be Mine, which is still a little bit scarce to come by because I don't even think that's been released on the YouTube channel for Guns N' Roses. Probably because the licensing issue between the movie footage and band footage, stuff like that, it's a little complicated to get by because it never goes off on DVD or Blu-ray or 4K after that. It's never included beyond Laserdisc as a bonus feature for T2. Also including the other thing is audio commentary comprised of interview clips from many people involved with the film, so it's not scene specific, but includes a lot of information in that regard, plus additional interviews, storyboards, the complete screenplay, 3 minutes of restored footage not included in the special edition, and teasers and trailers, and a bunch of other little things as well, so this was packed to the brim. Like, there's a lot of stuff to get off the entire thing. This is the same year they gave us the Star Wars Definitive Collection box set, which does have pretty good transfers, but it was very kind of meager on the interview clips and bonus stuff. It's not nearly as packed as this is. This was the premiere release of 1993 on the format, without a doubt. Like, people still praise this release as one of the best ones out there because it had utilized the format so much using the commentary tracks and alternate stuff and all the different things you could pack into this things. Like, it's so much, this is the prototype precursor to everything you'd have with home media going forward from this point onwards. And so just like it was such a prize box, it's like they reissued this many times because it was so much in demand. They kept doing new pressings of it, which changed the color of the emblem on the front of the box. It was like red and gold and silver and blue and stuff like that. So they very much went off the entire thing. It was so much in demand because the film was so much in demand. Plus, with the extended cut of the entire film, people just were satiating to see this so damn much. Now, of course, at the same time, they did release standard editions in widescreen and 4x3 of the Special Edition with no special features whatsoever. But we get much more interesting after this, because we get up to the squeeze Laserdisc from Japan, which were 16:9 anamorphically enhanced Laserdiscs. Now, there are two major releases of T2 on this format. The first was issued in September of 1996, then later reissued in March of 1997 with an incorrectly color-timed master, not approved by James Cameron, not THX certified. And luckily enough, in my digging around, someone did post a couple of screen captures of this edition online. So big thanks to that person, because it shows the fact that, as you know, T2 is very much a kind of a muted color scheme, very constrained palette. Not a film that's very vibrant in any type of ways in certain degrees. This master shows it off as very saturated, very vibrant, almost to a sickly degree, like never seen the film look anywhere like this. So I don't know who was handling this master to make it look like this. And it wouldn't be for about a year and a half after its initial issuing that we get an actual THX certified master released on the squeeze Laserdisc in Japan, which is just way much more back to the way the film was normally seen up to this point. Very much an anomaly in that type of way. This first squeeze Laserdisc, something that people kind of seek after at some points in time, and very much have very diverse opinions about how much they like it. And even against a 4K scan of a 35mm theatrical film print, doesn't look anything like that, which we'll get much more into when I get properly to the 4K edition of T2 on Blu-ray. Now, this THX certified master is the same one used for every subsequent release up until the Ultimate Edition DVD, so that covers a lot of ground that we're still going to cover. But this also was the first one to introduce a Dolby Digital 5.1 AC3 surround sound mix onto home media, which was a Cinema Digital sound mix that I mentioned earlier. Now, this was a very overly ambitious digital format that didn't have a long life. Now, the entire thing was developed by Eastman Kodak and Optical Radiation Corporation as a lossless digital sound experience with 44.1 kHz sampling, 16-bit system with a total maximum bitrate of 5 megabits per second, which is pretty goddamn beefy for the time. And it did have wider dynamic range, wider frequency range, more separation between the channels, but it had no room in the entire thing for an analog or magnetic backup track. So if the entire thing with the packing densities, the high total bitrate, got too much for the system, it would drop out. So you'd be sitting in the theater to dead silence. This was the killer of the entire format here, because Spielberg tested this out for his movie Hook, released the same year as T2, and as the entire thing went on and they had a dropout for the system in the middle of the test screening reportedly, that's when he walked out and said he would never use the system ever again. And so Spielberg is going to say no and says, you're cursed out for the entire thing, you're dead in the water. But it did make it for T2 and a couple other films, but the entire thing would soon be usurped by Dolby Digital 5.1 with the introduction of it with Batman Returns in 1992, DTS with Jurassic Park in 1993, and Sony's dynamic digital sound format with Last Action Hero also in 1993. So CDS popped in, kind of laid some groundwork that was a little too much to go for at the time, and didn't quite give it much of a safety net underneath it to kind of make it kind of a viable type of thing. But this entire thing where all these things, there's a lot of different releases of things, and they're not just Laserdisc or DVD. Because we got a lot of different things here. So all the Laserdisc AC3 releases going forward have this mix on it. Plus, the 1997 Artisan DVD also has this mix on it. Plus, StudioCanal put out a couple HD DVDs. One from France also has this mix. It has both the theatrical cut on one disc and the special edition on separate discs. So they can put two separate audio tracks on two separate discs. So that would be with the theatrical cut on that version. And there's a Japanese DVD with a DTS version of the entire thing, which apparently is a full bitrate DTS track that a lot of people really, really love. And so this THX certified remaster of the theatrical cut only is poured over along with the HD3 surround track to the 1997 Artisan Entertainment DVD, which is anamorphically enhanced with the theatrical teaser and trailer on. So a lot of people kind of really want to get that squeeze Laserdisc, kind of a novelty of it, which is going to have a big price tag attached to it. You can get this artisan DVD, which is almost the exact same thing, for like nothing. I got it for less than $10 on eBay. So it's a little bit of a better deal for a hell of a lot less money, but people will be what they want to be in terms of collectors in that regard. But the same transfer, not anamorphically enhanced, but the same transfer, and the AC3 go up on Laserdisc again for the final time in 1998 for US and Japan. And that would be closing the book on Laserdisc for Terminator 2 in that regard. But going up to the Ultimate Edition DVD. This is the big type of thing. This is kind of the big leap. Now we're getting really big on the traction here, because the Ultimate Edition DVD, aside from the Guns N' Roses music video like I mentioned earlier, everything from that Special Edition Laserdisc box set is poured over to the Ultimate Edition release. Now, interesting enough, there's two different releases of this one, because I got the original release, which was dual layer and dual sided, so it's a DVD 18. Now, the problem was a lot of early DVD players had a little bit of trouble with the laser reading these entire things, so shortly thereafter, Artisan reissued it as a dual disc set. Now, this is the same as T-Check certified master we've had with the previous AC3 surround mixed releases, but they did a lot more processing in the entire thing, because a lot of stuff in the DVD age, some of the lesser transfers were doing a lot of stuff where they're trying to do artificial sharpening, which resulted in like a bunch of edge halos, and a lot of the things that kind of stuffed out the organic details to just try and make the picture look sharper to a certain degree. And so just one of those things, like this early transfer kind of got futzed with a little bit, kind of processed to a certain degree, and kind of not the best results in that regard. So between the encoding of this one and the previous 1987 DVD, I don't think there's much of a difference, but certainly there's a little bit more processing, kind of brings out some uglier details in the transfer itself. But the more particular type of thing is the fact that even though it's the same master used, it's not the same mix. The Ultimate Edition DVD introduces the Gary Rydstrom Dolby Digital 5.1EX and DTS 5.1ES remix for the film. Now, those extra letters at the end of those designations, because it had an additional weird matrix center surround channel, so if you had the equipment to support it, you get a wider field in that regard. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people are very contentious. They're very much like, I don't think it's quite as much the type of thing like the Terminator with the mono mix versus the 5.1, which thankfully the new 4K edition does include the original mono mix with a new Atmos mix on top of it, which kind of reflects much more the mono mix elements to it. So very good type of thing in that regard. But this one's been a little more kind of dodgy in that regard, in terms of like a lot of audiophiles are deconstruct these entire mixes like living hell, like down to the finest spectrogram, minute details of a lot of different things in terms of every single element of all the LFEs, subwoofer channels, and all these different things, finding exactly what the peaks are, what other versions have kind of gotten certain channels filtered out. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go into that kind of detail. I'll give you the broad strokes of what we're dealing with here, because Gary Rydstrom was a very acclaimed sound designer and sound mixer, and he won the Oscar for the original sound mixes for Terminator 2. But for this DVD release, he wanted to go in and make a brand new sound mix for the home theater experience, and he went in with all the exact same elements. There's nothing new added in, so it's not like the Terminator 5.1 mix where they changed up a lot of the sound effects and stuff like that. He's using the exact same elements that are already present, with sound effects, dialogue, music, and everything else in that regard. But he's going in and trying to rebalance everything, because the CDS mix is designed for a wide field theater experience. So it's a lot of distance, a lot of space, a lot of things for the sound to kind of bounce off of and kind of feel the area for it. So it's very much a far space mix. So he decided for this version to kind of make it much more for a near field mix. So a lot of things are given a lot more kind of reverb to a certain degree in terms of like the music used. They're going to give it more ambiance and stuff like that. It kind of have to make it artificially fill the space in a certain way with a bigger sound in that regard. And so there's a lot of things where he's doing, like, I was picking up some other little notes that people kind of sharing on different forums from years and years ago and stuff like that. And it seems like sometimes he's kind of taking a bit more of the music out of the like rear surround channels and kind of accentuating more the sound effects to a certain degree. So a lot of things in that regard, where he's kind of enhancing sort of the LFE and everything like that, and kind of just give a little more spatial elements of different things. So kind of make everything kind of fill up the surround track, like the gunshots and explosions, stuff like that. Trying to work out much more of the sound effects, but not kind of bury the music overall. Some of the things will be much more front heavy. Some things will have a lot more area on the entire sound mix. So it's very much a rebalancing of all the elements to give it much more of a home theater kind of optimized experience in that regard. Now, some people swear by the CDS mix. Some people have kind of listened to both mixes, don't really pick up much of a difference. You kind of have to be really kind of just tuned to each one's surround channels, have a really well calibrated sort of surround system to really start picking up in all the little minute details of what Gary Rydstrom changed from the CDS mix into this one. Of course, when you're comparing it off to the Dolby Surround Matrix version, definitely would usurp that. Either one of these, because you're talking about a lot of discrete channels now. Pretty much the type of thing where Rydstrom was doing a lot of stuff to be doing a lot of precise panning of different elements in the entire thing, and various other things like that. So it's an interesting thing. There's a big article I'll link to below that has a full interview with him, Ling, who is very much an acclaimed DVD producer, whole type of thing from, I believe it was Widescreen Review, talking in depth about the entire process and the entire thing, and how they went about the entire effort of creating this new sound mix, the entire thing, which definitely, like, if you had the DTS, that was the one to go for. Unfortunately, my receiver back in the day did not have DTS decoder, so I was out of the DTS thing for the full run of DVD. All the way out of it. But the fact of the matter is, it's an interesting mix that has a lot of people deconstructing the living hell out of it, and people really are just so want the CDS mix, they want to have the pure theatrical experience from it. People feel like there's more elements that they kind of like better in that one than they do in this one. Definitely, if you're very much interested in that, there's plenty of stuff on different forums, on Reddit, and various other things here and there that could go into a lot more detail than I have the acumen or the time to go into in this regard. Also, now that we have DVD, and we have very special technology here, we have seamless branching, we can have multiple different versions of the film on one disc. Now we include the theatrical cut, the special edition, and the extended special edition, sometimes called the Ultimate Edition cut, all on one disc, which includes those 2 deleted scenes present on the Special Edition Laserdisc Box Set. This has the T-1000 going to John Connor's room, kind of look around for clues and find the letters from Sarah Connor, and the future coda sequence, which gives us an alternate ending for the film. We have this new future, the timelines change, now John Connor's an old man as a senator, and Sarah Connor's there, looking over grandchildren. Certain thing that James Cameron just felt like, and test screens as well, didn't quite feel like it fit right with the rest of the film, even though it kind of closes off the entire narration that we have from Sarah Connor in the entire film. Now it's her narrating the film from this alternate future. And so it's kind of an interesting type of thing, but some people still kind of like it today, but most people kind of swear by either the special edition or the theatrical cut as the proper version of the film. And so that's very interesting stuff to include here, and on a couple of subsequent releases as well. And so we move from August of 2001 with the Ultimate Edition DVD to November of 2002 with a very niche format release. There was a thing called D-VHS, Digital VHS, also known as D-Theater. It was a 1080i digital tape, and Terminator 2 got a release in this format with Dolby Digital 5.1 and 2.0 soundtracks, and only review I could ever find for this thing is an old archive one from Digital Bits that just said, yeah, there's a better quality in this whole thing. But you can still see a little of the trace of the edge enhancement for the Ultimate Edition DVD, but ultimately it's definitely an improvement, but it's not quite as comparable to other high definition titles released on that format at the time. So that was always a thing going forward that T2 has always struggled to kind of really excel on the HD formats. But after this, we're getting the release of Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines in 2003, and so Artisan decides, like, well, we're going to try to cash in yet again, and they did the Extreme Edition DVD. Now this one includes a brand new HD transfer of the film, available on the DVD, but also on a Windows Media Player digital rights management locked version that just impossible to use it now. Back in the day, this was a hot release, and this definitely showed a lot of improvement in the quality of the transfer versus the Ultimate Edition release. One, because it's a brand new HD transfer, and it's less processed. It's a lot more organic detail, a lot more detail in general in the whole thing. The colors come off much more organically, much more smoother in a certain way. So it just has a better aesthetic overall versus that more processed version they had previous to this. And this same transfer would port over to all the future HD DVD and Blu-ray releases until 2017. But on the audio front, they removed the DTS track of this whole thing because DTS was less accessible, less universal. Not everyone had the equipment to decode it, and so they stuck with the Dolby Digital 5.1EX and an Dolby headphone track. So kind of give and take in that regard, but certainly people said the headphone track was a very good type of thing, but you got brand new bonus features, all very much retrospective, because now we're over 10 years removed from the release of the film. We kind of look back on the legacy of the film and the special effects and all the different things. So you got a lot of other filmmakers chiming in about the film and how it influenced them and how it kind of pushed forward the technology of filmmaking. So it's a very interesting type of stuff. They got no feet but what we make featurette. You got the T2 on-set feature, just a lot of on-set footage in that regard, and a brand new audio commentary from James Cameron and co-writer William Richard Jr. Now this entire thing is scene specific to the special edition, which is the primary version on this disc. Particularly, weirdly, kind of the early days of DVD, they got a lot of these authoring and manufacturing sort of experts kind of got into this whole thing of putting a lot of Easter eggs in the whole thing, where you had to kind of search around the disc to find different things, or maybe type in a code somewhere. And apparently the theatrical cut was only accessible through an Easter egg on one of the menus. Now, oddly enough, on the Ultimate Edition version, that extended version of the entire film beyond the regular special edition was also only found through an Easter egg on the disc, which is a bit annoying. Especially when we get out much later on in the years, just like have to look up the old information, figure out where the hell to go on the menu. So just having the option present for everyone to watch instead of having to go through hoops trying to figure out where to watch the entire version. It'd be nicer just all on the menu and not have to futz around with things. But overall, the entire thing had interactive modes with visual commentary, behind the scenes footage, and a 12-page booklet with a little bit of input from DVD producer Van Ling. Like I said, he was a master in the field in that regard, and so just a lot of new information. But kind of a stinging point about the initial release, the fact they had this really janky metal slipcover thing that every time you slipped it on and off the entire plastic keep case, it just wrecked the plastic on it, just like it ripped it all apart. Terrible type of idea there. I think it was, I don't know if it was a little before, just we already had steelbooks at the time. It would have been nice to just have a steelbook instead of this kind of wonky sort of concept in that regard, because the Ultimate Edition also had a nice smooth slipcover. Didn't have all these kind of harsh edges and whatnot. Kind of slid on and off really nicely, but this one is a little less well designed in that regard. But so the Extreme Edition was very, very good. Like I said, it comes out right before T3. Has a lot of stuff that can really maximize its value, not just recycling all this stuff. None of the old stuff is recycled. This thing is all brand new transfer, special features, all new input, interviews, stuff like that. Just like it's all new stuff. So that's the important thing. You know, it's 2 years after the last release, they just revamped the entire thing, give you so much more to get on. So if you're a fan of T2, you really want to get this as well. You already had one that was already great, but now this one's even better than that because, again, new transfer, all the different things. So it's just more stuff to satiate your interest in the film overall. And so that was the last like major release on DVD format before you get up to the high definition formats, which there's a lot of stuff involving the war between HD DVD and Blu-ray. And it was kind of a thing, depending on what studio you're dealing with, which one would go which way. And apparently Lionsgate, who ended up getting all the rights and absorbing Heirs and Entertainment and getting the distribution rights for Terminator 2, would go with Blu-ray. But StudioCanal overseas, who had all the rights from the defunct Theatrical library, they did a lot of stuff with the HD stuff. And a lot of their releases were very much interesting because they're not the same over every single country or whatnot, like France or Australia or UK or something like that. They'll kind of do a little bit of something different in some regards, but the French HD DVD version, like I kind of mentioned before, had the theatrical cut on one disc, special edition on the other, and the theatrical cut had that CDS mix. But also there was one in Germany, which had all the Extreme Edition bonus features and just the special edition cut. So kind of interesting to have things here and there about what they're kind of putting out in different things, so different markets and different people dealing with that release in different countries and whatnot. We kind of shuffle things around and kind of take a different approach here and there, but HD would not be long for this world, as Blu-ray would stake its claim on the market of high-definition formats. Now, the film's American debut on Blu-ray from Lionsgate in June of 2006 was not really special. In fact, they put on a MPEG-2 encode, which is like the bog standard encode at the dawn of Blu-ray and whatnot. And they only have it on a BD25, so there's no lossless audio options, no room for it on this release. So they would just have the Ultimate Edition DTS ES track and the Dolby Digital EX track. That's it. There's no losses whatsoever. And it's the only theatrical cut. which makes it weird that they have both audio commentaries on, because the Wisher and Cameron commentary was done specifically for the special edition. So it's just a theatrical cut. They would have had to chop it down in some type of way to conform it to that runtime. So I don't know exactly that, but not really the one you want to get. Not at all. Especially in retrospect, don't even bother with this release whatsoever. But you could bother with the Japanese Steelbook that hit in 2008, which has both the Ultimate Edition and Extreme Edition bonus features, along with the theatrical and special editions on separate discs, encoded in MPEG 4 AVC with Dolby True HD 5.1. So early on in the entire format's life, this would have been the prized version to grab up for yourself. But it was the year afterwards where you gotta get a little bit of an upgrade from Lionsgate with a SkyNet edition. And this thing was kind of notorious for having a very long load screen. Like, it was one of those Blu-ray titles that connected the internet and downloaded content, and it would just take forever and ever to get through all the animations and all the screens and whatnot. Really annoying in that regard. But this Blu-ray release would be timed to coincide with the theatrical release of Terminator Salvation in May of 2009, but this one had a VC1 encode, so it's a little bit better, but not quite the standard you get up to, especially after Japan already exceeded that in that regard. This has all three cuts on the entire film: theatrical special edition and the extended special edition. And it does have DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 ES with the 5.1 Dolby Digital EX track and stuff like that, and the Dolby Digital headphone track added on top of that, which is much more compressed than the lossless version of the DTS Master Audio version. But it has a better thing where a lot of people reported, and I certainly kind of did at the original time, that the fact that some of the dialogue was a little soft. Like the volume levels, people had to kind of ride the volume levels a little too much dynamic range. They kind of didn't mix it in a certain way where it kind of got everything a little bit more of an uncomfortable sort of ebb and flow in that regard. So a little too much like very loud explosions, but very soft dialogue at some points in time. So it wasn't quite as equalized very well in that regard. But this thing included both audio commentaries, both deleted scenes for the Ultimate Edition cut, and the entire thing with some interactive modes like picture-in-picture, storyboards, screenplay modes, all these different things, text commentaries, punctuated with a lot of things, including a D-Box enabled mode. So you could hook this up. If you had a home D-Box setup or whatnot, it would work on that regard. So I don't know how many people really had that to make that much of use out of it, but they packed it full with a lot of stuff. But it was kind of a thing that they took that Extreme Edition HD Master and applied some digital noise reduction on it. So it kind of snuffed out a little bit of the details. Some of the grain was a little bit obscured here and there, so it wasn't quite, it was kind of starved for a lot of detail. As people were kind of starting to get up on some really good HD encodes and transfers and whatnot. This one is not quite hitting the marks as strong. Of course, didn't have the best bitrate. Even though it was a BD50, it packed in a lot more stuff on this whole thing. So it's a little, it's jockeying for a lot of bitrate and a lot of space on the entire disc, still having all those other bonus features, the interactive modes and stuff like that. So it kind of didn't even hit about 20 megabits per second as an average. So that is a little low on a certain scale of Blu-rays to have a lesser bitrate in that regard, especially for a film of this size. It feels like it much more should have been like a 2-disc set, the film on one disc, maybe the bonus features on a separate one to maximize the encode on the entire thing. So people were still a little starved for having a really breakout version of the entire film on Blu-ray, because they're just like, yeah, it looks a little bit better, but it's still not reaching the heights we really feel the film really needs to hit in terms of the entire visual landscape of the entire thing. Looking fantastic, just didn't quite get there at this point in time, but kind of interesting and really nice type of thing, because every so often you get these kind of real collector's limited edition sets. And at the same time they put out the SkyNet edition, Lionsgate also put out this sort of Endoskeleton Skull limited edition set, which has the SkyNet Blu-ray, a digital copy disc, and both the Ultimate Edition DVD set and the Extreme Edition DVD set. So this packs in everything that was available at the time. Every cut, every special feature, everything possible. It's like that's a pretty beefy type of thing. Like, yeah, I know there's certain things that could be kind of more streamlined to a certain degree. It's still a great type of thing that if you got this set, you got the nice collectible thing, plus all the other bonus stuff. So if you didn't already have the DVDs before then, this could get you everything you wanted in that regard. So just nice the fact that they put forth the effort to have something that's much more definitive in that regard. You know, some people are still having a little lackluster reactions to the actual audio, technical, and visual elements that were present on the SkyNet edition. Now, getting up to the release of Terminator Genisys in 2015, comes a kind of a quiet reissue of the entire film from Lionsgate. And this one's become very well known. It's kind of like kind of the best version overall, because on this one they took the same master but they did different things with it. They removed a lot of the digital noise reduction. They give it a better bit rate, so it's much more healthier in that regard, so it looks a lot nicer. It represents that scan in a much better way. Before, on the SkyNet edition, you had all 3 cuts. This one kind of trims it down to just the theatrical and the special edition, but it's now encoded in MPEG-4 AVC HD, so you're getting much better quality in that regard. And on the audio front, there's a slightly different mix here, because they have a DTS 5.1 master audio track, which doesn't have that rear center matrix surround channel whatnot. It's kind of a slightly different mix that kind of solves the kind of problem they had on the previous SkyNet edition, where the entire thing, like I said, people kind of rode the volume a little bit too much because some things were too quiet, some things were too loud. This one kind of evened out the entire mix. They have things a little bit more on a nice, more comfortable range in that regard. And plus, it had a DTS headphone track, so people kind of said it was a little bit better than the Dolby one they had before, because now it's probably just a better bit rate and stuff like that in that regard. And they removed all the audio commentaries from this thing and all the interactive mode stuff. They got rid of all that stuff and they put in a couple of featurettes from both the Ultimate Edition and the Extreme Edition set. So they kind of mixed things up and kind of pared it down and kind of made it more easier to get more bitrate out of the film. They kind of put the film more forefront, and so they can kind of have the features kind of a little bit more the back seat type of thing on this whole thing. So I think they did a much better job overall in terms of like getting the transfer looking a lot better in terms of the bit rate and removing the DNR stuff and having the audio kind of evened out to a certain degree. So it's a nice sort of lightly redone type of release on the entire thing that people very much praise on such a great degree go, because if anyone's going to go between SkyNet edition and this one, this would definitely be the one to get. Even though you kind of lose some of the audio commentary stuff, the quality of what they did for the film is definitely improved over that previous edition in 2009. But now in 2017, we get to the point of talking about the remastered 4K and 3D versions of the film, which gets into some very ugly territory because it's one of the most notorious remasters in the history of home media. Because this thing was put together for a theatrical 3D re-release, which I did go see, and I thought that the 3D conversion was done very, very well. Now, I'm not a person who went to see a lot of 3D movies. I was very seldom in that regard, but going out to see this in the theater was a very good experience. I thought the 3D went out very, very well. And though there's only a few sequences that really come to life using a lot of dimension and stuff like that, in terms of like the opening Future War sequence, the end steel mill sequence, that gives a lot of layers and depth to the entire frame. They kind of utilize the dimension of the entire thing in that regard. But in general, I thought it went out very, very well. But once you actually get the disc for the entire thing, boy, a lot of stuff just really popped out as like real egregious type of stuff. Because one, they had to apply a lot of digital noise reduction for the 3D process. And the fact of the matter is, when you did stuff like this, even like with Jurassic Park, which I did see 3D and thought was okay in certain places, but some places not so much, you have to do a lot of stuff to kind of futz around the image to kind of get away all the film grain, to kind of make it much more of a cleaner image, to kind of do all the 3D conversion stuff. And so the fact of the matter is, they kept that for the 2D process, which is interesting because even on the 2D Blu-Rays, they still have an opening text saying this was mastered pretty much for the 3D version, even though you're not watching a 3D version. Interesting enough, Lionsgate did not release a 3D Blu-ray. StudioCanal did in all of their territories internationally, so you never got one in the United States, but you could import it, usually from Japan, I believe, which will also be Region A. But the fact of the matter is, Lionsgate did not go on that path because 3D Blu-rays have kind of slowly, gradually sort of gone out of style in a certain degree, and even today, very hard to grab one in the US in that regard. But the fact of the matter is, if you got more detail out of this entire thing, because there was more detail to be seen in some places, but it's all scrubbed out so much because it just looks very, very splotchy. And the fact is, when I did the original video on this whole thing back in early 2018, I didn't have a 4K setup, but I do now, and it looks way worse in 4K. Even with the HDR10, it just looks worse. It just accentuates more of these splotchy qualities. It just makes everything look very, very waxy. It's not very well done. It's just, the fact is, it's a 3D presentation that you're seeing in 2D that's not supposed to be seen exactly that way. But as we've gotten so much of now, James Cameron's back catalog out in 4K, and the fact that he's used a number of DNR, AI upscaling, a lot of other tools as well to kind of not retain the most organic qualities of the stuff he shot on film, really much shows forward the fact that maybe this is something that he doesn't have a problem with. That maybe it is a better version of the scan that got graded and stuff like that he doesn't want to put out there. Maybe he's just fine with this heavily DNR'd mess, but a lot of people just wrote this off as one of the worst 4K remasters, period, because we've got so many things to look at now. There's hundreds of titles that have been done so much justice. They look actually wonderful on the entire format. This looks so egregious. And we're not even getting into the color grading yet, because some places, some of the stuff is more saturated. It looks more bold in certain ways, and it's perfectly fine in some cases, but getting the entire thing where it just looks so green. It's like this green tint put over so many different things, like all the stuff in the desert. Had the entire sequences there were before, they had maybe some purples or some those really lush golden hues to a certain degree. Now it's this really drab green. It looks really ugly. It's not very good, and plus all the contrast is blown out. It just looks like some of the backgrounds are blown out. We have some sunlight pouring in to like Sarah Connor's cell. A lot of stuff before where you could kind of see a little bit more detail. Now it's completely blown out. Cameron stands by this and said even the original cinematographer worked with him on the entire color grade and whatnot, and he thought, well, his eye is just as good as it was back then. Well, the fact is, even though there have been a number of theatrical film scans that kind of floated around here and there over recent times, there's one that's been very exceptional. And it is a theatrical film print, so it's kind of a few generations removed from the highest quality source to get the most detail and stuff like that, and it does not show off anything close to what the 4K Blu-ray edition shows off in terms of the color grade. In fact, it looks a lot more blue than most of the other masters, and just has a little bit more purity to some of the colors. Like, it's not as much kind of futzing towards teal tones or something else like that, or kind of stable colors for the entire thing. Now, of course, it's gone through a bit of a restoration process in terms of making sure that there's not much of a fade. They kind of maintained much more of the color and the stability of the blacks and stuff like that. But it just looks like a fairly good print, even though there's a lot of scratches here and there and whatnot. But in terms of the color grade and everything like that, it looks very solid to a certain degree. And it shows a very good, again, filmic qualities because it's from a less processed film scan of the entire film. Now, I will admit, the scene where we initially go into Sarah Connor's cell at Pescadero State Hospital during the daytime, the color grading between the theatrical film scan and the 4K remaster are very much similar, but even then, the theatrical film print has a lot more nuance in the colors and the natural skin tones. And while there are certain sequences in the entire film, such as nighttime scenes with the blue washes, the steel mill sequence at the end of the film, very much graded similar to how we've seen them before, there's just so much in the entire 4K master here that is so starkly different from how we've ever seen the film present before. Sometimes there's maybe a little variation on some of the shades and the tones and whatnot. It's usually pretty consistent in a general sense about how the film looked before. You always maintain the same sort of color palette overall, but this one really futzes with it in a lot of cases, and just so many different qualities and everything just doesn't look very pleasing. Like, a lot of people just have a lot of problems with this thing. In fact, that this is a lot of years old at this point in time that we're talking about it now really kind of accentuates the fact that it's just not a good transfer. And the fact that, again, all the stuff we've gotten for The Abyss, Aliens, True Lies, a little bit of Titanic, whatnot, they all show certain variations on the amount of DNR he's using, the sort of color palette he's using now to kind of alter some of the schemes in the entire films. And so it's like a lot of the stuff he's put out recent times as 4K remasters, a lot of people are very contentious about the stuff. It's showing the exact same symptoms of problems the T2 remaster had, just to varying degrees. Maybe not as much DNR, but it still looks kind of processed. A lot of stuff has much more green tones than it had before. A lot of the skin tones are kind of lost in some places. Certainly The Abyss, I think Titanic came off the best in these regards. And of course, the new 4K of the Terminator, it's gotten pretty good marks. There's some scrutinous qualities about the entire thing, but at least, like I said before, include the original theatrical mono track and a Dolby Atmos remix that kind of reflects much more the qualities from that mono track as well in terms of the sound effects used. And so some things are going off in good ways, some things not quite as much. So it's a real mixed bag what Cameron's done with the 4K transfers of his films in this regard. So T2 is definitely the most egregious, I feel. It just shows off so much. Like, it's just the worst of what you could do with a 4K transfer that doesn't accentuate what the format can do. Give you more detail, more organic qualities with the entire thing. To the better color qualities and the depth of everything like that. There's so many things you could make use of on that format that this transfer does not excel in any type of way in that regard. And furthermore, James Cameron went in and did some digital alterations on this version to kind of fix up some continuity stuff and some sort of exposed camera crew in some places. One thing is fixing a continuity error where the entire truck crashed down to the canal driven by the T-1000. Originally, the entire windshield of the thing fell off, but then was back in place in subsequent shots. Well, this has now been fixed in the 4K edition, and the stuntman of Peter Kent has had his face removed and replaced with that of Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 4K edition. And additionally, from the Escape from the Pescadero State Mental Hospital, there's actually a shot where the entire camera kind of moves over and exposes a bunch of the camera crew and camera equipment near the edge of the frame. Now, interesting enough, on the 4x3 edition, this is not visible at all. But in all the widescreen editions, it was, but not like people picked up on it. But in this new resolution, I'm sure it would come up much more evident, and so we didn't digitally erase the entire thing. And maybe a few other instances came up, but those were the main things that came up in the research on the entire film here. And even more objectionable is the fact that they did include on the 1080p Blu-ray, not the 4K, but the standard Blu-ray, the Special Edition and the Extended Special Edition of the entire film, but they didn't remaster the extra footage. So you go from the brand new 4K transfer with the new color grade and all the DNR to the old HD transfer with the old color grade, the whole thing, so it looks starkly different. It's just a real terrible lack of care put in the entire release that kind of slapped the two different things together and not give a shit that they look like completely different films. It's really bad in that regard, and odd type of thing. Now, they did put together a brand new 55-minute long documentary, but it's presented in standard definition. They know they produced it in HD, but they put it on in standard definition on the disc, alongside the old T2 making a featurette from the early 90s, and we have both audio commentaries and the deleted scenes for the Ultimate Edition cut, but that's about it. And it's just a really, really awful, it's just a really awful release. Again, people have been talking for years, like, are we ever going to get a new version? Like, if they announce like an anniversary steelbook, oh, we're going to get a new 4K redone or whatnot. It's like, no, it's not happening. I don't know if there's another shoe to drop for Terminator 2. I really don't at this point in time. This many years on, it seems like there's been very, very quiet. We've got plenty of opportunities to maybe drop a different master. That hasn't happened. And like I said, no one's commented on it in an official capacity. And so we're kind of left up to, again, people getting theatrical film prints, scan them in to try and do some restoration work on the color grade or whatnot, and try and give the film that theatrical filmic look overall that we've been kind of robbed of to a certain degree, because we're dealing with either a brand new 4K remaster that looks really, really bad, or we've got an HD transfer from 2003 that's very, very starved for details. But guys, hope you enjoyed me kind of going back through the entire wider scope of the home video history of Terminator 2, and any releases that you do have. Please let me know which ones you find the most pleasing, which ones have the best bonus features overall, which one you have that has the best audio, because again, that's a big stinging point. That was one of the big things that I did this Redux video for the entire thing, because a lot of people were talking about the fact that I didn't really talk about any of the audio mixes much before, and there was a very big holes in that regard to cover in the history of the entire film here. So pretty much let me know which ones you like the best. If you like the AC3 CDS mix, the Rydstrom mix, some of the other things going on the whole thing, pretty much let me know how you feel about all that stuff. So guys, thanks so much for checking things out here on the channel. There's a Super Thanks feature here on YouTube to contribute anything monetarily to us. Also Patreon to get early access to everything we have on the channel. But comments, likes, sharing links around, subscribing if you haven't, they all help to make the channel healthy and create much more better things for us to do for you guys in the near future. So guys, thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.